Welcome to Free Range Flock. We were once the latchkey kids who came home to an empty house after school. We were feral, resilient, cynical, and innovative. Older than Google. Our teenage faces were never posted on social media. The internet was just an idea in our youth. Now we are older, wiser, and thriving. Our independent ways will continue to serve us. We plan to keep defying the odds, and we will carve our own path with grace, with humor, with joy, our way. We've been through some stuff. We will continue to keep pushing, and we are not going anywhere. The former latchkey kids are now the free range flock.
So, Sass, do you love sass? Like, as in you, not to be sassy, but do you love who you are?
I do love who I am. I think it's taken me a very long time to get here. Mm-hmm. I didn't love myself so much when I was young.
Yeah.
I had a lot of self-doubt and a lot of insecurities about who I was and am. But now, yeah, I am who I am. If you like me, great. If you don't, that's fine too.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like it's taken me a long time to kind of really fall in love with all my little quirks and aminess, and there are people who don't like me, and that's quite okay. No harm, no foul. It's a cup of tea. Hopefully, they have found their people, and because I have found my people, and I know who I am. But have you ever ridden on a plane and, during that whole safety lecture when they're talking about, when the flight attendants come out and they're like, if the oxygen mask drop, please put the one on yourself first before you help someone else. And I always thought that was so strange because, I'm a mom and if my kid's sitting beside me and the oxygen's leaving the cabin, I'm going to make sure he's okay first. But I realize now that, I'm always putting the needs of someone else in front of me, but I can't take care of someone unless I take care of myself, and how important that is.
It's hugely powerful.
Yeah.
We do have to fill our own vessel before we can fill others.
Right. And just the whole concept of loving ourselves and taking care of ourselves, just how that important that is. And one of the things that I really did not realize until recently was just how important self-love is to the feminist movement. It does make sense, but God, It's so hard to do. That's why we invited our friend Gale Greenlee to come and talk to us today. Gale just completed her work as a teacher, scholar, and residence at the Bell Hooks Center in Kentucky. So today we're going to focus on the importance of loving yourself. So, Gale, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited that you're here. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so my name is Gale Greenlee. I am from Greensboro, grew up here, and I am Ralph and Betty Greenlee's middle child, always and forever. Rest in peace to my daddy. My mom is from a rural town in South Carolina, and my dad was from a small town in western North Carolina, and both of those places have been really just they make my core, really. But I am a writer. I'm an independent scholar of African American lit and Black girlhood studies, aspiring children's author, and yeah, that's about it.
Yeah.
What else do you want to know?
Yeah. Whenever I think of you, you're having a hand in many things. So
always many things. Yeah.
Many things.
Yeah.
And do you do that to kind of? Do you find that you do that for your own interest, or is this you're just always gravitating to multiple things?
I think that's just my being.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I just always gravitated to many things, much to my father's chagrin. He was of that generation where you get a job and you stay in it until you retire, and that has not been my story. Far from it. But I've had the benefit of having lots of experiences that my parents didn't have, that they wanted us to have, and then the benefit of being good at several things.
Right.
You know, like if something really has my interest and I'm drawn to it, then I really invest a lot of my time and energy in it. So yeah, it's just, I think, part of who I am, and then also because I don't like to get bored.
I see a lot of myself in you. That's why I mentioned that. So you just completed your work as a teacher, scholar, in residence at the Bell Hooks Center. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Absolutely. And I actually have to go back to 2019.
Okay.
Because I was, the Bell Hooks Center is located at Berea College. Are you familiar with Berea? Are you familiar? Because, you know, you're from Appalachia.
I've heard of it. I'm just not, I don't know much about it, like historically, but I've heard of it, of course.
Well, it is a small liberal arts college. It was the first interracial and co-educational college in the South, pre-Civil War, pre-emancipation. And so it was founded by an abolitionist minister who was run out of town by racist mobs who did not want black and white students to be educated together. And he and others came back and rebuilt and continued their work. And so the college is there now. You also may have heard of it because it's a tuition-free college.
Oh, okay.
Like it's a labor college, one of like 8 or 9 in the country. So students work in every aspect of college life, whether it's admissions or the library or the grounds crew or what have you. But the college is committed to educating students who are economically disadvantaged and college students who come from Appalachia in particular, who may not have the resources.
Okay.
So in 2019, I was there as a visiting assistant professor of African American Lit, and I came because of Bell Hooks. My dissertation was looking at Black and Latina feminist scholars who wrote for children, whether children's picture books or young adult novels or middle grade novels or even crossover fiction. And Belle was one of them because most people don't know. She wrote about 5 kids' books. And she was at Berea College as a distinguished professor of Appalachian Studies. She donated her papers to the college, I believe back in like 2015, 2016. And so I wanted to come. My idea was that I was going to come and I was going to work in her papers when I was in grad school. That didn't happen. But this position opened just as I was finishing my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill. And so I went and I was working in her papers. And COVID hit. And when COVID hit, the director of the Bell Hooks Center, Dr. Shadi Malaklu, posted on Facebook, hey, does anybody know someone who'd be interested in helping us create basically an exhibition or an permanent installation for the Bell Hooks Center? And she was my neighbor. We were friends. And I was like, hey, me, I'm a Bell Hooks scholar. I'm already in her archives all the time. So at the height of the pandemic or the beginning, where we really had to be careful about social distancing and having, very few people in the same space, it was me, an archivist, and another friend and now collaborator, Annie Brown, who were digging in Bell's papers to help create this installation that's now in the center. So that was sort of the beginning of my relationship with the Bell Hooks Center. And then a few years later, which was last academic year, I went back as a teacher, scholar in residence. And it was a Mellon-funded position. And it started 3 years ago. This is the 3rd year of the project, of the grant. But our charge was to create a symposium in Belle's honor because she had she passed, in 2021. So when the grant started, she was still living. When I was there at Berea in 2019, 2020, she was still living. So no one had any, well, I shouldn't say that. I was about to say no one really had an idea that she was going to pass when she did.
Right.
Many people knew and were aware that her health was declining. But I think when the project was proposed to Mellon, it was this idea of really, sharing her legacy, celebrating her legacy and who she is in the world, who she continues to be even after her passing. And so our work was really to put together this symposium, in addition to teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
So many people may not be familiar with the work of Bell Hooks. So can you give us an introduction to our listeners?
Yeah, so she is, it's hard for me to say was, because she is still such a part of my life. Bell Hooks was a feminist scholar, activist, cultural critic, an artist, a poet. She wrote extensively and furiously. She wrote more than 30 books, including children's picture books. She wrote plays. There are several manuscripts of just, reams upon reams of poetry in her archive. She wrote published poetry as well. But at her core, she was a feminist scholar, and she believed in, really men and women, human beings in general, living self-actualized lives free of domination, free of patriarchal domination and sexism. And so that's what she wrote about. She actually wrote her first book when she was a college freshman.
Wow.
Yes. And she was only 18 years old. It ended up being her first book, which was Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism. And she was really calling out mainstream feminist movements for ignoring the experiences of Black women. And so it was a huge intervention at the time it came out. I actually remember finishing my first semester at UNC Chapel Hill and waiting for my mom to come and pick me up for winter break, and going into Bull's Head Bookshop, which is no longer there, taken over by Barnes & Noble. But going into Bull's Head and seeing the book cover and seeing her name written in lowercase, like, what is this? Who is this Bell Hooks? And what is this book about? And so that was my introduction to her. She's written about class. She's written about men and masculinity. And she's probably most well known for her book, All About Love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something we definitely want to talk to you about today. And that brings me to my next question. So Bell Hooks talked about self-love as the most radical exercise of anti-oppression a woman can practice. Can you talk about how self-love is an important part of the feminist movement?
Absolutely. And I want to bring in another voice, and this is of June Jordan, Black feminist poet, who said this when she was part of the National Black Writers Conference at Howard University in 1978. And she said, I am a feminist, and what that means to me is much the same as the meaning of the fact that I am Black. It means that I must undertake to love myself and respect myself as though my very life depends upon self-love and self-respect. It means that I must seek to cleanse myself of the hatred and contempt that surround and permeate my identity as a woman and as a Black human being in this world. It means that the achievement of self-love and self-respect will require hourly vigilance. It means that I am entering my soul in a struggle that will most certainly transform all the peoples of the earth. The movement into self-love, self-respect, and self-determination is the movement now galvanizing the true majority of human beings everywhere.
Wow.
But I'm drawn to that because it's not just Bell. I think Black women, particularly in Black feminist circles or Black womanist circles, some would say, have really been concerned about self-love and communal love in general for forever. And I'm saying like since 19th century. Alice Walker coined the term womanism to really speak to the experiences of Black women and other women of color from a feminist perspective. And she had this saying that womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender. And so it's like a deepening of feminist, thinking and ethics, and womanist thought or Black feminist thought has always been about community, about self-love, but loving all of us and bringing all of us along, Black men as well as Black women. And so, I don't know, I think about this June Jordan quote. I think about Audre Lorde and her battle with cancer, and the quote that, circulated, especially after COVID started, where she said that self-care was not an act of indulgence, but of political resistance. And so I think for Black women in particular, because that's the vantage point that I view the world and how I walk through the world, that it has always been about how you regard yourself in spite of the environment that you're in spite of patriarchy, in spite of what Black feminist scholar Moya Bailey would call misogynoir. So it's a real gendered, specific kind of racism or anti-Blackness that's hurled at Black women. So despite the virulence of that, how do you regard yourself and know that that's not you?
Right.
You know, that is the system, and how do you hold on to your core, and through that be able to connect with others and again, bring us all along. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. We live in a culture where we're told to just work, and the logging off of our computer just feels like, because I work in academia, like we should be working, and that taking that moment for myself has always felt very like it's an indulgence, like you said.
Yeah.
And I've kind of hit that brick wall recently where I've got to look after myself, and this institution's not going to look after me. I'm going to have to put my foot down and say, I'm going to look after myself. If your project or thing doesn't get done, that's what happens. But I think that's happened to a lot of us after the pandemic, because we realized what was normal was not something that we could is not self-sustaining. We can't do it. And we're coming back and we're thinking about things differently. So I think all this hitting differently because we are different, and it's waking us up, which is great. It's just hard to verbalize it because it feels so like it's in our core. It's who we are, and we're having to reverse course and put it in reverse, and we're so used to going in the drive as fast as we can. So it's good that you're telling us this, and we need to hear this. So,
well, what's so interesting, because I'm again thinking about Belle, is that, and I did have opportunity to sit with her before the pandemic hit and have conversation with her, and I'll never forget. She said one time, that academia will kill you, especially if you're a Black woman. And I think there's a lot of emotional labor that women scholars in particular perform, and especially women scholars of color. And students may not recognize that that's how they're responding to you, or that's what they expect of you. And I've had to check myself about it because, I went to UNC Chapel Hill, so very large, predominantly white institution, very small community of Black students. And so I know what it's like to be in that kind of fishbowl, and I definitely care about all my students, but particularly for the Black students that walk through the door, or the Latinx students who walk through the door. And for example, I had a Latina student at UNC who said that a white male professor told her she didn't belong there. And so, of course, I'm going to do what I can to support you. And my goal, I think, personally, in the classroom has oftentimes been to help students get what they want and what they came for without being harmed, because the institutions do harm you.
Right.
Just like Belle said, and even Nikki Giovanni was giving a talk online with this group called Girl Trek, and she said, the institutions don't love you.
Right.
They don't. They won't. But they will extract from you all kinds of labor.
Right.
To the point of excess, to the point of breakdown, which is, I don't know if you've read Tricia Hersey's book, Rest is Resistance. She is a Black womanist theologian out of Atlanta, and she writes about how, our lives we're entrapped by capitalism. It's so shaped by capitalism and productivity and being defined by what you do. And particularly for Black people and our history of enslavement in this country, we're tied to work in very unhealthy ways.
Right.
I mean, Americans are in general.
Right.
But that experience of enslavement, or that history and legacy of it, is, I think, a very particular experience. And needing to really take back our time.
Yeah.
And refuse, really, some of the stress, some of the demands on time and expectations, and we're not always able to do that.
Right. Right. So when I was researching for this episode, I saw this very transformative quote in Bell Hooks in the symposium page. You may know this quote. So I'm sure you know this quote. So it says, "Rarely, if ever, have any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion." This Bell Hooks quote just kind of really made me pause. And I was,
why?
Because because we went through a time of such isolation, and I think the timing of it was it. And then just we're all trying to heal, and because I am in academia and I see my students really struggling, and they won't come to class, and I'm like, we need to take care of each other. You need to come to class so that we can heal. And that's what academia is struggling with, is that students are just going, I can't be there. I need to not come. But we're struggling to heal. So I think it's kind of that we don't know how to overcome this. So that's why that stuck with me, because what I was going through. So we are living in times when people are struggling with mental health and looking for ways to reconnect with others and themselves. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of reconnection after working with bell hooks?
Community was absolutely important to her, critical to her. She wrote a book, and this has been many, many years. I can't even tell you what year it was published, but it was called Sisters of the Yam: Black Women in Self-Recovery. And it was really about Black women coming together to heal, needing various forms of healing or what have you. And actually, the first time that I went to her house, she was interested in having what she called a sister circle. And it was more spiritual in intent, but it's kind of difficult for me to separate the spiritual from the healing aspect.
Right.
But we don't exist in isolation. We really don't. And that quote is actually on an altar at the Bell Hook Center. So whenever I would go into the center, I would see that. But, you think about personal relationships, whether it's a love relationship or whether it's with friends, you see your shit when you are in relationship with one another.
Right,
we're mirrors for one another. And so I know that she wrote that she felt like you cannot have self-love outside of community, that, we are interdependent. We're absolutely interdependent. You regard me and I regard you, and how do we walk this path together in a way that is just, in a way that is not oppressive, in a way that allows both of us to really be free.
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, Gale, putting you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
How are you practicing self-love?
That's a good question. Because I feel like, again, it's hard for me to separate self-love and healing from spirituality. And I have had my issues with the church, with traditional churches, and I've also been deeply informed by church as well, and Christian spiritual traditions, through family. And even my best friend is a minister, and we talk about God and the divine all the time. And so there's a way in which I absolutely feel like I practice self-love on a daily basis, because I recognize that the divine is in me. I know this for sure. I don't need anybody to tell me that.
Right.
The part that I don't always do well is probably the self-care, and those things are related but a little different. I feel like the self-care is kind of a manifestation, or it grows out of self-love.
Right.
And really being able to engage in those practices that are healing on a physical level, emotional, mental, spiritual, what have you, whether it's catering to or meeting our physical needs, like for sleep, meeting our mental health needs, like saying no, creating healthy boundaries with people. So yeah, it's something that I continue to work on.
Right. How about you, Sass? How are you practicing self-love right now? But maybe not right now, but in your life.
Right now, in this minute, in this studio.
In the studio. No, that's a really hard question right now, as you well know, because I'm going through some stuff with work, and it's a lot. So I think one of the things, when we were just talking about self-love and self-care, one of the things that I found interesting is that a lot of people think those are the same thing.
Right.
And they're not.
And they're not. And there's so much internal work that needs to go into self-love, recognizing who you really are, being true to that, internal self and your values and everything. So I think that's really interesting. But for self-love, I think that's not as much of a problem from I like who I am. I love who I am. This is me. It took me a long time to get here and say those words. But a lot of times those boundaries that you were talking about learning how to say no, that's something that I still struggle with.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
so because I'm a nurturer, I want to take care of people.
Yeah.
I don't want to hurt anyone. I'm going to try to accommodate you the best I can.
Yep.
And those boundaries are constantly shifting for me because of that. Because I do want to be that nurturer and caretaker.
I'm also going through things at work, but I'm detaching from that. So I'm leaving academia. I'm going to do it part-time. Like I love being in the room with my students. I love that, watching those ahas, because I teach public speaking. So watching them go from being really nervous to standing up and speaking for a long time is joyous. But that's the best part. And I'm like, I'm going to leave and do something else, but I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that little thing. But I always heard myself say to my students, less is more. Don't try to do everything in your speech. Do less is more. Streamline, do a few things really well. And I think I heard myself say it the other day, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm trying to do everything for everybody. So I keep telling my son and myself and the world, like, we're going to do less. We're going to do less and simplify so that I'm not working all the time and I can enjoy some Amy time. I'm actually as I've been transitioning out of academia, seeing a therapist, just because it's been a lot to unpack. And he asked me, when have you done something just for yourself, just for the pleasure of it? And I said, does a shower and sleep count? He goes, no, it does not count. And I'm like, I can't answer the question. And he's like, something's wrong. You're teaching, you need to take care of yourself and love yourself and that care. But then also you're showing your son, this is how you do things. You go to the point of a breaking point.
Exactly.
And so less is more is now my motto going into the new year of less is more, less is more. So, and that stems into self-love. Like, I love myself enough to look after myself and do that for myself.
Well, it's just you saying that about, just overworking, is reminding me again of throwing me back to the June Jordan statement about how it's an hourly vigilance. And even with Audre Lorde, it's not... I don't know. The conversation is so interesting to me because oftentimes the self-love, self-care conversation gets real individualistic, and it's just about what I'm going through. And for both of those women, they were thinking, yes, it is about you, but it's you within the context of community. And so this overwork is about you, and it's also about these structures, these economic structures,
Yes.
and how can we intervene in that? So if I'm caring for myself within that, then how am I also working to disrupt that kind of structure that's making it impossible for us to have healthy work lives,
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it brings up something that I saw recently on the internet, and I can't remember the term that they're using, but it's basically at 5 o'clock you leave.
Right.
It's that no longer you're staying and you're working and you're going home and you're checking your email and you're doing all these extra things. It's like you're putting in your 9 to 5 or whatever your hours are. And at the end of that, you leave and you clock out. And I aspire to that right now. That's just like something I really need to institute better in my life. But it's like we all need to do that because the structure won't change unless we stop doing the things that they're, working late, putting in hours on the weekends.
Right.
Like you were talking about earlier, that, Black women tend to work harder and there's that stress of feeling like you have to do more and more and more. And I think that unless we all stand up together and say, this is not the way we want to live our lives, nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
And that's the power you were talking about.
Well, and that's what Belle was talking about in terms of healing, not being in isolation or, self-love outside a community is really about collective liberation.
Right.
How will we all get free?
Right.
Truly.
And I think it's only gotten worse since the pandemic because I think companies are investing less and less in staffing. They're expecting their employees to do more and more, wear more and more hats. And at some point, the system's going to crumble because people can't do it forever.
Well, the system is crumbling.
Yeah, that's true.
It has been.
That is very true.
Yeah.
But I work in higher ed, but my son is in elementary school, and I'm seeing the beginnings of it in there, Whereas they pride, like, everyone's got to come to school every day. You should come to school every day. You should strive to get the attendance award of, not missing any school. And I remember trying to get that award when I was little, that was a big deal. But now, because I've done all this self-reflection, I'm thinking, this is the, hey, thanks for coming to school sick award, or, thanks for putting your academia ahead of the community award. Like, you didn't take time to look after yourself award. The fact that they literally award students for not missing a day and taking a day for themselves, or, have a cold, or don't feel good, still come to school. No, this is where it starts.
This is capitalism.
Agreed.
But school is, and I love school. I'm a scholar as well.
Yeah.
I'm an educator as well. And I have a love-hate relationship with academia.
Yeah,
I can say
me too.
that without, any doubt. And am very critical of some aspects of it. And I can also recognize that not just with higher ed, but particularly with K through 12, it is a kind of training ground, right? To help and obviously, folk need structure. Kids need structure in particular. I know I, as an adult, have my particular routines or what have you, structure that I've created for myself. So some of that is necessary, and at the same time, it is teaching students, young people, what it means, to prepare them for work life, for life as an employee, as a worker, right?
Exactly.
So it's all of us are being impacted by capitalism.
But why don't they have some mental health days? Why don't they have a day where they say, hey, they can take this, maybe it doesn't count against them. They can say, I'm not physically sick, but I need a day.
Yeah.
I need a day to sit in the corner, do some Legos, and I want to feel better at the other end.
And I think you see that in higher ed more so than K through 12, where professors, I know that this past semester or last spring of 2023. Sorry, my dates are getting mixed up. I was co-teaching a Black Girl His Studies class with my friend and colleague, Dr. Leanna T. Looney, and we would have mental health days, or mental wellness days, and students opted in for, doing either come into class or not, or sometimes we all would take a break, and it was time and space for them to continue to write or do whatever they needed to do to work towards the projects that they were preparing. And sometimes that work wasn't work necessarily like hardcore research and writing. It could be reflection. It could be, being in community with other folk, with friends. It could be going to an art space or, something, whatever's feeding you in that moment.
Right. So this has been a great conversation, Gale. Thank you so much for coming in and talking to us about the importance of self-love.
Thank you for having me.
It has been such a pleasure to see you again.
It is great to see you all again.
So Sarah, we love having Gale. We could talk to Gale all day long.
Oh my gosh, yes. She's an amazing human being.
Yes, just into everything. But what was your reaction listening to Gale today?
To be honest with you, it's something I'm going to have to sit with for a little bit.
Yeah.
But one thing I did write down as she was talking was the whole rest is resistance.
Yes.
Because so much of the time we're expected in our roles, and especially in American culture, of working to the past, your point of resistance.
Right.
And then, all the other things that tend to get piled on top of you. And we push the whole rest and relaxation and just that whole, you need to recover. Your body needs to recover. Your brain needs to recover. And it constantly gets pushed down the road.
Right.
And by taking that back and resetting those boundaries, that is resistance. That's telling the system, I can't go any further than this. This is where I have to stop.
And that's so hard because in the American culture, it's all about work. So but I'm glad that you had that reaction. I could see it just sitting across from you that you were having that reaction. And I as well, I need to sit and kind of unpack a lot of that. So hopefully our listeners are also at that place too. Let's sit and kind of really think about what was being said. I found a lovely quote that I want Sarah to read for us. It is a quote that actually came from Bell Hook's work called All About Love, New Visions.
One of the best guides to how to be self-loving is to give ourselves the love we are often dreaming about receiving from others. There was a time when I felt lousy about my over 40 body, saw myself as too fat, too this, or too that. Yet I fantasized about finding a lover who would give me the gift of being loved as I am. It is silly, isn't it, that I would dream of someone else offering to me the acceptance and affirmation I was withholding from myself. This was a moment when the maxim, "you can never love anybody if you are unable to love yourself," made clear sense. And I add, do not expect to receive the love from someone else you do not give yourself. That quote came from Bell Hook's work called All About Love, New Visions.
That's such a powerful quote. I feel like we just need to end it there because it's just so powerful. I mean, what else can you say after listening to that? So you have to love yourself. You can't expect someone to love you if you can't love yourself.
And it all comes down to that. I mean, I think that if we are going to survive our culture, and it comes down to that we have to love ourselves, and then we have to radiate that love out into our communities. So if you haven't followed us yet on our social media, we would love to have you find us on Facebook, on TikTok, and on Instagram. And come and tell us about what your feelings on self-love, both in your community and within your own families. What does that look like for you? Thanks, y'all, for listening. Thank you for joining us for Free Range Flock. Our goal is to inspire and celebrate who we are, the Generation X kids who grew up and decided to do things their way, with grace, humor, and joy. This has been a production of Sassy Am. If you want to learn more about our podcast, follow our blog, share your positive insights about being a free ranger, or to suggest topics or guests for future episodes, please visit our website at sassayam.com. That's SASSAYAM.com. Keep pushing.